Now, our second topic of today is future organizations, and I'm really proud to introduce our second keynote speaker of today, Jurgen Ingels, and he will talk about the necessity of a collaborative vision in this age of digital disruption. Now, who is Jurgen Ingels? He's a successful serial entrepreneur, board member and investor. He will walk us through his vast experience in starting and leading disruptive companies and organizations. He just founded a European Fintech ecosystem, Eggsplore, and will share his vision on this exciting new age of networks and digital disruption. So his topic of today, what type of leadership does it take to build a company and grow it into a global player? Give you a warm welcome to Jurgen Ingels.
Well, I'm happy to use this as a first slide. As you can see, I was also on the balcony, so that's a good step to start. 20 minutes, so rapidly on collaboration. Very briefly on my background. Studied political and social sciences, so I'm not a technologist, but I'm very fascinated by technology. It's actually one of my passions. I started my career working for Dexia in private equity, so investing in technology. I did that for about 8 years. And then in 2000, I had this crazy idea because I was using systems of a bank to transfer money. And it took a long time, it was very expensive. The bank basically didn't know where the money was when I transferred it. And I thought, well, that's funny. So I came up with an idea, no rocket science, to actually change the way money is transferred. And that was Clear to Pay. It's a company I created in 2000. So it was a lot of fun. And so the company grew to about 1,600 people at the end when we sold it, with 23 offices all over the world. And we were working for all the largest banks. So that was a lot of fun. And then last year I decided to sell the company, not so much because I wanted to sell, but I think the opportunity in payments and financial software is better. But I also think that I could not create the next generation company out of Clear to Pay. I needed to have a different structure, a different mentality, and I'm obviously going to try to explain that a bit. So today, after selling the business to a large American company, I decided, let's do something else, but let's do it differently because the environment and climate has changed. As you can see, I'm also involved in a couple of technology companies. Probably some of you guys might know Materialize, which is a 3D printing company. Some of you might also know NG Data, which is a big data company. So I'm on the crossroad more of technology, 3D printing, obviously digitalization, and all that kind of cool stuff, basically. Also involved in startups. So I'm still the chairman of startups.be that I set up with a couple of people. Also involved with Volta, where I also helped founding that. So I'm obviously very interested in startups. But I think that's enough about that. So what I would like to do is just talk to you about 6 transformations. And there's obviously a lot of transformations. As I said, in 2000 I started my company from a beer cart, grew it out. And today I would like to do that again, but the changes or the situation has changed. I think one thing that has changed in 2000, I saw that things were moving slow. I mean, you needed a lot of patience, especially on payments. If you transferred money, it took 2 days, 3 days for an international transfer. I think today, and that's very important, people sometimes ask me what's the most important point about digitalization, and I always say it's about real time. The world today acts real time, and organizations that want to adapt have to work in a real time way. And I call that instant satisfaction. I see that with my son. He's 13 years old. When I transfer money to his account on my computer, every time, 3 seconds later, he takes his mobile phone and he looks at it and he says, "That's where's my money." I said, "Guy, I mean, I just wired it." So, but the point is, he's wired in his brain to almost have everything immediately, now. And I think organizations for tomorrow, if you work in an organization and you want to change, you actually have to take into account that real time is going to be the new normal in a way. So that's, I think, is the first thing. The second thing I would like to say is when I graduated, I had this sticker on my head which said, "Good for 40 years." In a way, I could operate in an organization for 40 years and I could be fine. Maybe the first 10 years would be better than the last 10 years, but at least I could be there. And I was working in my own neighborhood. I was working in a place that I went to, and I obviously stayed there and so on and so forth. But today, it's completely different. Today, it's completely different in the sense that young people, they are good for 10 years. And it doesn't mean, in my case, for instance, I was very good at Excel when I was studying. and I'm still good at Excel, but when I compare my skills with the young guys' skills, I still do the work, but I do it in 3 hours, and these guys do it in half an hour because they use something that I don't know, and I didn't have time to study it because I was always busy doing other stuff. So the point is that in the future, I think as a person, you almost need, and as an organization, you almost need to give your people, after 10 years, 6 months or a year off, and allow them to actually study again. So almost create studying is going to be, I think, for the years to come, very important. And as you can see, today, you don't have to be in your office. You can actually work from anywhere in the world, which is obviously a very cool idea. The third thing I would like to mention is that, I don't know, this is a report, or a rapport in English, and you can see this guy has a 6 and he has 9s and 8s and so on. And I don't know about you guys, but especially in Flanders, when I take this home to my mother and she looks at it, the first thing she's going to say is, it's good, but look at the 6. This is not very good. You should change it. You should have to work on it, and the 6 should be 8. And personally, I think that's wrong. I think we are much more conditioned to try to take what's not good and to try to change it into average. And I think a person of tomorrow, a young guy of tomorrow, needs to do it differently. He needs to look at the 6 and say, okay, I'm never going to be a 9, I'm never going to be a specialist in this, forget about it, but I have a 9, I have my talents, I should focus on my talents and really focus on what I'm good at and try to be the best in the world at what I'm good at, and work with other people who are in their field the best of the world, and together we can actually build these kind of cool products which are going to be the best of the world. And I think that's a completely different change in mentality. So focus on your talents and forget about stuff that you're not very good at. The fourth thing, I think, is working for one company. When we studied, we worked for one company, and always in my career, I've always done different things. And people say, what the hell is he doing? I was bored here, I worked in other companies. I always had bosses who were very frustrated by that, but I thought it was very important because I learned so much from doing that in other companies, in other sectors, in other companies, in other kind of situations, that it actually allowed me to have much more advantage compared with other people who were working in a specific sector within one specific company. And so I think in the future we will not be working for just one company, but we will actually work for multiple companies. And we will specialize in something that we're very good at, and we are going to do that not just for one company, but we're going to do that for several companies. So the ability to actually allow people to work for different companies, even within your own organization, is something I think you should support in the future organization. Another thing is, when I studied, you were actually trying to get knowledge, and you kept the knowledge with you. Because when you kept knowledge with you, people came to you because they thought you were smart. And because people came to you, you actually became important as a student, but also in a company. And so keeping that knowledge was very important because it was a function of being able to actually grow within your organization. These days are over. I mean, young people, they think in another way. They say, I have knowledge, and what they would like to do is they would like to share that knowledge. Because if they share the knowledge, they get liked. And if they get liked, they become important. And so the importance is not so much related to the fact that they have knowledge, but the importance is related to the fact that they share and that they help other people. And it's my opinion, not today, but in the US, for instance, it's already starting, that this kind of mentality is going to flow through organizations as well. That sharing will almost become a kind of new normal. And so I think also for the future organization, you have to think in that way. Now, the last thing is proprietary. There's a lot of financial institutions that say we have 1,000 developers and we're big and we want to do everything ourselves. But these days there's something like open source, which allows you to actually use not just your own brain power within your organization, but brain power from outside of the organization. And if you have 1,000 developers in a bank, but I'm a developer and I'm sitting there writing code in open source and I have 100,000 fellow developers helping me with my source code to make it better and to expand on it, I'm far, far more powerful than any bank in the world. And so again, that's a change in mentality. Trying not to do everything yourself and keep everything to yourself and have assets almost on your balance sheet. Forget about the assets on your balance sheet. It's not about the assets on your balance sheet. It's how you can integrate existing assets and actually, again, share ideas and keep smart people around you and use some of their insight. And so Tesla is a great example. He just allows people to have his platform and people can look at it and he shares a lot of the technology. So again, sharing. Now, it's my point that in future organizations are going to be more and more open platforms. And let me explain what I mean with that. And this is an example of, it's an example of banking, but it's also true for any other sector. And this is basically two axes. So you see the axe business to business, business to consumer. And you see the axe unidimensional, multidimensional, basically one sector or different sectors. And so my former company, Clear2Pay, as you can see, we were actually building software for banks that was sold to the end customer, but we did not have any contact with the end customer. We sold to banks. And we only sold into the banking environment. So it's not a bad segment to be, but it's not perfect. And so your banks, you see financial institutions, they are business to consumer. They obviously sell to customers, but they only have information within their banking environment. And then you see another segment, where organised, for instance, which is a very technology-savvy segment, they built for different sectors in a B2B environment. So for instance, a plugin for payments is not just on the payment industry, but it can be for logistics or for B2B and so on. Now what you see in the world is that these three segments are actually not interesting segments, because today it's all about knowing data about your end customer. And it's not just information about your environment, but information outside of your environment. And so you see these three segments gradually actually moving into a B2C multi-dimensional segment. And the only way they can do that from a technology perspective is by creating a kind of open platform. A platform where you run almost the platform as a company, or you actually make services that can tie in end-to-end with that platform. And I think organizations will have to either make a choice. Either will have to become the platform, or they will have to make sure that their services are integrated fully within that platform. Now, is that new? No, it's not very new. If you think about Google and Apple, basically they're global platforms, but they are platforms. Now, Apple is not so open, but anyway, it's a platform. So this is not just going to happen in banking. We see this change of open platforms happening in all kinds of industries. We see that happening in healthcare, we see that happening in telecommunications, Internet of Things, logistics. And you also see over time, that's not the case today, but these platforms, open platforms, will actually merge into one interconnected environment. And I think that's important to know or to realize. Now, if you have this open platform, this will allow companies to actually work together with each other and to create a kind of ecosystems. And an ecosystem, and in that ecosystem, it's going to be important to focus on what you're good at. And so that's also something I think that I would like to share, that I think people will have to more and more focus, organizations have to focus on what they're good at and really focus on that only, basically. Now, focus on what you're good at is not something new. I don't know if there's any economists here in the room, but I'm pretty sure there are. So there was an economist, Ricardo, who lived in 1850, and he was actually traveling in Scotland, and he saw that the Scottish were using a lot of the capacity of the country to build wool. And he also saw that they were using some of the capacity to make wine, but very inefficient, because they were not used to it. And then he went to France, and in France he saw just the opposite. He saw the French making a lot of good wine, but they also needed wool from time to time, because sometimes it was cold, and they were using some of the capacity of the country to make very inefficient wool. And so Ricardo said that doesn't make any sense. In a way, everybody should do what they're good at. The French should make wine, the English should make wool, and actually they should do trade. And because they do trade, each one can make more than before, because they're using the capacity very efficient. And so society as a whole will win. And I think that principle is something I think you need to take into account going forward, because I'm a big believer that this Ricardo law, which is a bit forgotten, will actually redirect or we come back to the importance within organizations. And so just to give you an example, because this is obviously my field, technology and banking, just to give an example, there's a lot of articles about tech companies are going to kill banks and so on and so forth. I don't believe that. I think a tech company is a technology company, a bank is a bank. And both have very, very, very strong elements that speak for themselves at which they're good at. A bank is good at looking at the balance sheet, but also looking at risk. A technology company is good at very rapidly building software, agile, straightforward, and so on, which the banks are not very good at. And so in the world, banks and tech companies should actually work together and create something that ultimately, for me and you, will have or will be the best product. And this is not only going to happen within the banking environment, it's going to happen all over the place. And so, explaining all this, thinking about this, then I said, well, okay, fine, I sold my company. I'm not going to be lying somewhere on a beach. I want to do something else. But I think it's not enough to just start a new company. You actually need 3 things, in my opinion, to be successful. And so the first thing that you need is funding. That's obvious. So rather than going after money with venture capitalists, I said, let's create our own fund. So we created a fund, which is SmartFin Capital, which is a 75 million euro fund for larger companies and 25 million for smaller companies. So it's about 100 million. That we actually invest in those platform technology companies. So only in companies that have this platform vision. The second thing that we said, okay, banks will need to have this platform. The back office structure of banks need to be adapted to allow them to work together with these technology companies. So we need a technology platform layer. And so this is actually a new company I started with a couple of friends to build, similar like Clear2Pay, a new company that can help and change the way banks interact globally. And then the third thing, in my opinion, is that you not only need a platform, you don't only need money, but you also need an ecosystem. An ecosystem that is actually going to do a couple of things, but that's going to be in the center of a European Fintech system, and where you can actually share a lot of the things that I said. Sharing will become important, putting people together physically, where they can sit and work together, and create also an environment that's brand new, not the old way of working, but where you can just sit down, chill in, come back, work for 2 hours, get back out, and all of that. So the flexibility is going to be important. And so within that space, we have, within Eggsplore, access to funding, access to know-how. We create all of the, let's say, the data from the sector. We have access to government, where we try to influence certain things. Brussels is a very good spot, I think, for financial technology. We're one of the regions, I think, in Europe that has a very good track record for 10, 15 years in building these kind of global technology companies. The Dutch, they don't have that much, but they are very good at marketing it. And so we also bought a building in Brussels, Diegem, which is a building of 5,000 square meters, which we're actually now converting completely. It's going to be done normally in March, April of next year, and where we will put all of these elements together. So the sharing element, putting technology companies together, young companies with older technology companies, companies from Belgium, but also companies from Israel, from the US, that we will actually host in Brussels and give them a place so that they can from there on conquer the European market. And obviously it's going to be good for all the environment working around it. Very modular for scale-ups and startups, and obviously a bit different in a way. So the idea is to build this kind of new tech valley is maybe a bit exaggerated, but the idea is to build something and to create something in the new way of working, where not only just you start, but you take part, you become part of an ecosystem, and you become part also of this new way of working. And so, to wrap up, I would like to give 4 things away, or 4 things with you. I think freelance is going to be the new normal, so you have to think about that if you're a future leader, and also deal with your people who work for you. I think sharing is going to be key. It's very important that you organize yourself as an organization, but also as a person, and have an open mind to that. I think you have to work as Ricardo and really try to be good at what you're good at, and forget about what you're not good at, and try to be passionate about what you're good at, and become really the best in the world. And last but not least, I don't think it's going to be financial fintech, financial technology, but more tech for fin. Technology is going to be used in every organization, not just in banks, but to help steer and make organizations more efficient and adapt for the future. So that was it.
Any questions for Jurgen? Please, then I can throw. Like really far. No questions? Oh, thank God. Ooh, nice catch.
Okay, you talk about, well, it was a nice presentation, thank you. You talk about establishing a tech valley in Brussels. You also talk about sharing and collaboration. But it seems in this whole fintech hub that every region wants to be the premier fintech hub, especially in Europe. There's London, but then there's different other players. How do you assess this, or how do you deal with it?
But it's clear that today, especially on financial technology, it's a bit of a hype. And it's not because it's financial technology that the laws of success are going to be different. In other words, of 100 of those companies that start, 70 will go bankrupt. But I do believe that if you look into Brussels as a region, because of the fact that we have 15 years ago, we started companies similar like Clear to Pay. So you have Capco, you have Clear to Pay, financial architects, business architects, there's a whole heap of companies. And in contrary to the States, people here, when the company gets sold, most of those companies are sold already, but the people stick around the church tower in a way. So they're not going to go like the States where they then move. And so there's a lot of knowledge around Brussels, around how to build a back office system, a very critical back office system. Now, in digitalization, there's a lot of people who talk about front-end applications in digital. Personally, I think the fight on digital is not so much on the front end, but it's much more on the back end. And your organizations should actually first adapt their back end, so that once their back end is up and running with modern technology, that they easily can integrate the front end. Besides that, I think Brussels is also very close to the European Commission, so regulation is here, which gives us a couple of examples or advantages. Now, if you compare it in Europe, in the Netherlands, for instance, and UK, they're saying fintech, and they're doing a lot of fintech. Government is doing a lot. Unfortunately, in Belgium, the government is not doing a lot, which is a bit of a pity. But I think, well, it's a good spot to be, and I think we have a lot of the ingredients to make a very good soup, if you will, but we just have to shake and bring everything together. And so that's one of the things that I think this is fun, so that's what I would like to do. And it doesn't mean that because we're doing it, this is going to be successful. I mean, but my dad used to say, if you don't try something, then you never know it's going to work or not. So.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
Hello, yes. Yes, Jurgen, thanks for elaborating. But I have a question on your vision on Belgium. You said, like Ricardo, in France they should produce wine, and in the UK they should produce wool. But what about Belgium, besides of your fintech expertise? What other domains might we invest more in Belgium?
Well, I mean, let me maybe start by saying, rather than trying to do everything, which we more or less do today, we should not do that. We should say, okay, we want to compete internationally, so let's focus on what we're very good at, and let's only do that, and forget about all the rest. So I would say biotechnology for sure. I mean, we have some track record there, and it's good. I think logistics, although from a B2B internet commerce, I think we've lost that to the Netherlands, which is a pity because we really had a very good spot there. I also think healthcare. I think we have one of the best hospital situations in Europe, so we should do much more in health, trying to expand on that, everything related with new technology on health. And I definitely think fintech should also play a role. But I would say, as a small region, we should maybe do 4 or 5, and that's it. And not try to do 20 and satisfy everybody. So we have to make some choices.
And in politics, do you think we can convince them to invest in these domains more? And to export this knowledge?
I hope, but it's a big fight. I mean, it's very difficult. And it's also understandable in a way because it's not their home turf. But I think if you compare it to 10 years, 20 years ago, people could still look at it and say, well, let's just wait and see what happens, and then we can intervene. But we're now in a situation where the globalization actually allows us also not just to lose the production of things, but also the services of things. And so the Chinese and everybody's coming. So if we wait, we might end up one day in the morning and realize that we actually lost a big chunk of our business. And then not just the business of the services part, which we're strong at, but all the related businesses are going to go away as well. So I think it's a threat for our future and for our children.
Okay. So. Thank you.
Okay. Give him a warm applause, Jurgen Ingels. Thank you.